coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen like a broken promise, and I sat in my basement workshop surrounded by the electronic guts of other people's problems. Circuit boards, tangled wires, and the smell of burnt solder, my world for the past 15 years as a tech repair specialist. Above me, I could hear Vara pacing across the hardwood floors in her designer heels, probably rehearsing another presentation for the advertising agency where she'd climbed her way to head of accounts. I'd been awake since 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling and listening to her breathe. Not the peaceful breathing of sleep, but the calculated rhythm of someone pretending. She'd been doing a lot of pretending lately. The basement workshop had become my refuge over the past 6 months. Down here, things made sense. You diagnosed the problem, identified the faulty component, and either fixed it or replaced it. Clean, simple, no gray areas. Unlike my marriage. I picked up the smartphone I'd been repairing for Mrs. Henderson from down the street. Water damage from her grandson's unfortunate encounter with the toilet. The logic board was fried, but salvageable. I'd already ordered the replacement parts and quoted her a price that would barely cover my costs. That's what you do in a small New England town like Millbrook. You help your neighbors, even when it hurts your bottom line. The floorboards creaked overhead as Vara made her way to the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open, the clink of her protein shake bottle, the aggressive whir of the blender. Her morning routine had become as predictable as the sunrise, except colder. I climbed the stairs, carrying my empty coffee mug and what remained of my dignity. Vara stood at the granite counter island we'd saved 2 years to afford, scrolling through her phone with one hand while the other held her breakfast replacement. She wore the charcoal gray suit I'd helped her pick out last Christmas, back when she still asked for my opinion on things that mattered. "Morning," I said, refilling my mug from the pot she'd made but wouldn't drink. Vara had given up real coffee months ago, along with carbs, sugar, and apparently any interest in acknowledging my existence before 9 a.m. She glanced up from her phone just long enough to register my presence, then returned to whatever was more important than basic human courtesy. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the severe bun she'd adopted for work, the style that made her cheekbones look sharper and her green eyes look like chips of ice. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, settling onto the bar stool across from her. "The Hendersons want me to look at their home network setup. It's a bigger job than usual, but it would mean working evenings for the next 2 weeks. I could use the extra money, but I wanted to check with you first since—" "Corbin." She didn't look up from her phone. "I'm not your mother. Stop asking me for help." The words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. Around us, the kitchen hummed with the sounds of our life together. The dishwasher finishing its cycle, the grandfather clock in the hallway marking 7:30, the neighbor's dog barking at the mail truck. Normal sounds for a normal morning, except nothing about this felt normal anymore. "I wasn't asking for help," I said quietly. "I was asking for your input, on our schedule, like married people do." Vara finally looked up, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Not regret, exactly, but maybe recognition that she'd crossed a line. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever moment we might have had evaporated. "I have an early meeting," she said, grabbing her purse and the travel mug that had replaced actual breakfast. "We'll talk tonight." But we both knew we wouldn't. We'd sit in the same living room, watching different shows on our respective devices, speaking only when necessary. The talking had stopped months ago, replaced by a careful choreography of avoidance. I nodded, finished my coffee, and went to work like nothing had happened. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I'd learned that arguing with Vara was like trying to debug code written by someone who spoke a different programming language. Technically possible, but ultimately pointless. That evening, I opened the folder with our household bills. Electricity, internet, phone, car insurance, credit cards. Every account was in my name. A leftover from the early days of our marriage when my credit score was better and Vara was still building her career. She'd always been grateful for that, back when gratitude was still part of her vocabulary. I logged into each account and removed autopay. I scheduled cancellations and saved the confirmation emails to a folder I labeled New Beginnings. Then I opened the bank app and moved my salary to a new account I'd opened during my lunch break. The process was methodical, almost therapeutic. Each click of the mouse felt like cutting a thread that had been slowly strangling me. By the time Vara came home from her client dinner at 9:30, smelling like wine and someone else's cologne, I'd already packed my essential documents and transferred them to a safety deposit box at a different bank. She found me in the workshop, organizing my tools. "What are you doing?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe in a way that used to be inviting, but now felt like she was blocking my exit. "Getting organized," I said, not looking up from the socket wrench set I was arranging in order of size. "Thought it was time to clean house?" Corbin, about this morning? Don't worry about it, I said, finally meeting her eyes. You were right. I should stop asking for help. Something in my tone must have registered because she straightened up, her hand moving to fidget with the pendant necklace she wore, a nervous habit from our college days that apparently hadn't changed. I didn't mean it like that, she said. I was stressed about the Morrison account presentation, and you took it out on me, I know. I closed the tool case with a satisfying click. Like I said, don't worry about it. I figured it out on my own. The next morning, I went to a lawyer before work. Jennifer Walsh had handled my sister's divorce 2 years earlier, with a kind of efficient ruthlessness that made her expensive but worth it. Her office was in the renovated mill building downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that somehow managed to feel both modern and timeless. How long have you been married? Jennifer asked, reviewing the documents I'd brought. 12 years? No kids? Assets? House is jointly owned, but I made the down payment and handle all the utilities. Cars are separate. She has her 401k, I have mine. Joint checking account that I've already cleaned out and closed. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. Already? I move fast. Vara's smart, but she doesn't pay attention to the financial details. Never has. Any infidelity? I hesitated. I had suspicions, the late meetings, the new clothes, the way she'd started password protecting her phone, but nothing concrete. Not that I can prove. Doesn't matter for no-fault divorce. We'll file today if you're ready. I signed everything the same day. I listed the separation date as that morning and asked for all communication to go through the attorney. I left the office with stamped copies and a strange sense of relief, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after months of suffocation. 2 days later, the lights went out. I was sitting in my new studio apartment above Mick's garage when Vara's first text arrived. The place wasn't much. One room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a view of the parking lot behind Murphy's Hardware, but it was mine. No shared spaces, no careful navigation around someone else's mood, no walking on eggshells in my own home. The text was simple. Power's out. Did you forget to pay the electric bill? I deleted it without responding and went back to the repair manual I was reading. Mrs. Henderson's smartphone had arrived that morning with a new problem. The replacement logic board was compatible but needed custom firmware. It was the kind of puzzle I actually enjoyed, unlike the one I'd been trying to solve for the past year. 20 minutes later. Internet's down too. What's going on? Then, Corbin, answer your phone. Then, this isn't funny. I turned off my phone and walked downstairs to Mick's office. Michael Torres had been my best friend since high school, back when we were both skinny kids who got picked last for everything except academic decathlon. Now he was 6'2" of muscle and tattoos, with a successful auto repair business and a reputation for not taking anyone's garbage. He'd also been telling me to leave Vara for the past 3 years. How's the new place? He asked, looking up from an invoice he was reviewing. Quiet, I said. Really quiet. That's good, right? That's perfect. Mick studied my face with the kind of attention he usually reserved for diagnosing engine problems. You look different, more relaxed. I feel different, like I've been holding my breath for months and finally remembered how to exhale. And Vara? Vara's discovering what it's like to handle her own problems. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket for the past hour, but I'd left it on silent. When I finally checked it that evening, there were 17 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. The progression was almost scientific in its predictability: confusion, irritation, anger, and finally something approaching panic. The last message had arrived an hour ago. I found the papers. We need to talk. I poured myself a beer from the 6-pack Mick had left as a housewarming gift and sat down at the small table by the window. Outside, the October evening was settling over Millbrook with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything look like a postcard. The maple tree behind the hardware store was just starting to turn, its edges touched with gold. My phone rang. Vara's name appeared on the screen, along with the photo I'd taken of her last Christmas morning, smiling, relaxed, wearing the cashmere sweater I'd saved up to buy her. It felt like looking at a stranger. I let it go to voicemail. Then I called Jennifer Walsh. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, she said. I'm guessing she found the papers. About an hour ago, based on the message frequency. Any contact? 17 calls, 23 texts. I haven't responded to any of them. Good. Keep it that way. All communication goes through me now, remember? What happens next? She'll probably try to contest the separation date, claim you abandoned the marriage without notice. But the utility cancellations are time-stamped, and you have documentation of her verbal rejection of the relationship. The judge will see this as a reasonable response to hostile behavior. I'd given Jennifer the full context of Vara's dismissal, along with a timeline of our relationship's deterioration over the past year. The late nights, the separate bedrooms, the way she'd started treating me like an inconvenient roommate rather than a husband. How long until it's final? In Massachusetts, 6 months minimum if it's uncontested. Could be longer if she fights it. She'll fight it, I said. Vara doesn't like losing control. Then we'll be ready. After hanging up, I walked downstairs and found Mick closing up the garage. He was wiping his hands on a shop rag, the kind of methodical cleaning ritual that meant he was thinking about something. You want to grab dinner? He asked. Roxy's working tonight at the Green Lantern. She's been asking about you. Roxanne Delacroix tended bar at the only decent restaurant in Millbrook, a converted farmhouse that served the kind of food people drove from 3 towns over to eat. She was also the unofficial information hub for everything that happened within a 20-mile radius. If you wanted to know who was sleeping with whom, who was behind on their mortgage, or which businesses were about to go under, you bought Roxy a drink and listened carefully. Sure, I said. But I'm driving separately. I have a feeling tonight might get interesting. The Green Lantern was busy for a Wednesday, filled with the usual mix of locals and tourists who'd discovered the place through online reviews. Roxy was behind the bar, her silver hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 50-something years. She'd moved to Millbrook from Boston after her divorce, trading city stress for small-town gossip and apparently never looking back. Well, well, she said, as Mick and I claimed 2 stools at the end of the bar. Look who's finally out and about. I heard you moved into the apartment upstairs from the garage. News travels fast, I said. Honey, in this town, news travels at the speed of light, especially when it involves the Finlors. She poured 2 beers without being asked. Word is Vara's been calling everyone she knows, trying to figure out what happened to her utilities. Really? Casey Morrison was in here an hour ago, practically vibrating with excitement. Apparently Vara called her in a panic, saying you'd lost your mind and abandoned your responsibilities. Casey Morrison was Vara's closest friend and biggest enabler, a real estate agent who specialized in gossip and manufactured drama. She'd never liked me, probably because I'd never been impressed by her stories about which clients were getting divorced or who was having trouble making their mortgage payments. What did Casey say? Mick asked. Oh, she was eating it up. You know how she gets when someone else's life explodes. But here's the interesting part. She also mentioned that Vara's been seeing someone from work. Lance Dorsey, the new creative director at the agency. The name hit me like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Lance Dorsey was everything I wasn't. Tall, polished, drove a BMW that cost more than I made in a year. He'd been at the agency Christmas party last year, spending most of the evening making jokes about blue-collar authenticity while eyeing my wife like she was a prize he intended to win. How long has that been going on? I asked. Casey didn't say, but reading between the lines? A while. Long enough that Vara's been getting advice about how she deserves better than a marriage that's holding her back. I took a long drink of my beer and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not hurt, exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity that made everything make sense. The late meetings, the new clothes, the way she'd started treating me like an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. You okay? Mick asked. I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. I'm absolutely perfect. The next morning, I drove past our house, former house, on my way to a repair job across town. Vara's silver Lexus was in the driveway, along with a BMW I recognized from the agency parking lot. Lance Dorsey was making himself comfortable, apparently. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just noted the time and kept driving. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for me at her kitchen table, along with her smartphone and a plate of homemade cookies that smelled like my childhood. She was 70-something with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from raising 6 kids and managing a household budget for 5 decades. How's the repair coming along? She asked, pouring coffee into a mug that had World's Greatest Grandmother printed on the side. Almost finished. The logic board replacement worked, but I had to write custom firmware to make everything compatible. It's more complicated than it should be, but that's modern technology for you. Speaking of complicated, she said, settling into the chair across from me, I heard you and Vara are having some troubles. In a town the size of Millbrook, privacy was a luxury nobody could afford. Everyone knew everyone else's business, usually before the people involved figured it out themselves. We're getting divorced, I said. No point in pretending otherwise. I'm sorry to hear that. You always seemed like good people. We were, for a while. Then we weren't. Mrs. Henderson nodded, like that explained everything, which maybe it did. You know, my Harold and I went through a rough patch in our 3rd year. I thought about leaving him, actually packed a suitcase and everything. What changed your mind? He did? Harold figured out that marriage meant showing up for each other, especially when it was inconvenient. Some people never learn that lesson. I finished the firmware installation and ran a full diagnostic test. Everything checked out perfectly. Better than new, actually, since I'd upgraded the memory and optimized the operating system while I was at it. "No charge for the extra work," I said, handing her the phone. "Consider it a thank you for the cookies and the conversation." "Nonsense. You did the work, you get paid for it." She pressed 320s into my hand. "And Corbin, whatever happens next, make sure you're proud of how you handled it." I drove back through town, past the agency where Vara worked, past the coffee shop where we used to meet for lunch during better times, past all the landmarks of a life I was systematically dismantling. It felt like watching a movie of someone else's story. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer Walsh's assistant. Mrs. Findler has requested a meeting to discuss settlement terms. Are you available tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I pulled into the parking lot behind Murphy's Hardware and called Jennifer directly. "That was fast," she said when she picked up. "What kind of settlement is she talking about?" "The usual. She wants to keep the house, half your retirement savings, and alimony. In exchange, she's willing to agree to an uncontested divorce." "What's she offering me?" "Your freedom, apparently. She seems to think that's generous." I laughed, surprising myself. She always did overestimate her own value. What do you think? "I think we can do better, a lot better, especially if she's as eager to get this over with as she seems to be." "Why would she be in a hurry?" "Good question. Maybe she has plans that require being single." After hanging up, I sat in my truck and watched the normal rhythm of small-town life play out around me. People running errands, kids walking home from school, neighbors stopping to chat on the sidewalk, the kind of ordinary interactions that had somehow become foreign to me over the past year. My phone rang, Mick's name on the display. "You busy?" he asked. "Just finished a job." "What's up?" "Roxy called. She wants to talk to you about something, but not over the phone. Can you meet us at the garage?" 20 minutes later, I found them both in Mick's office, looking like they'd been planning something. Roxy had traded her bartending clothes for jeans and a sweater, but she still had that alert expression that meant she'd been gathering intelligence. "I did some asking around," she said without preamble, "about Vara and Lance." "And? And it's been going on for at least 4 months, maybe longer. Casey's been covering for them, telling people that Vara's been working late on big accounts." "How do you know?" "Because Tommy Brennan was doing electrical work at the agency last month, and he saw them together after hours. In Lance's office, with the door locked." Tommy Brennan was Mick's cousin, a union electrician who worked commercial jobs throughout the county. He was also the kind of guy who noticed details and remembered them accurately. "That's not proof of anything," I said. "No, but this might be." Roxy pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. "Casey posted this on social media 3 weeks ago. Look at the background." The photo showed Casey and 2 other women at some kind of wine tasting event. Behind them, barely visible at a corner table, were 2 figures who looked remarkably like Vara and Lance sharing what appeared to be an intimate dinner. "Casey deleted it the next day," Roxy continued, "but I screenshot everything interesting. Occupational hazard of bartending. You learn to document the drama." I studied the image. It was definitely them, and the body language was unmistakably romantic. Vara was leaning across the table, her hand covering Lance's, both of them looking like they were the only people in the room. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because Vara's been telling people that you're the problem, that you've become distant and unsupportive, that she's been trying to save the marriage while you checked out." "And you think I should defend myself?" "I think you should protect yourself," Mick said. "Vara's smart, and she's connected. If she wants to rewrite history to make herself look better, she'll need you to look worse." "What are you suggesting?" Roxy and Mick exchanged a look that told me they'd already discussed this extensively. "We're suggesting," Roxy said carefully, "that you might want to gather some evidence of your own, just in case things get ugly." "How ugly could they get? It's a no-fault divorce." "Corbin," Mick said, his voice serious, "you've been married to Vara for 12 years. In all that time, have you ever known her to lose gracefully?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about Vara's reaction when she didn't get the promotion she wanted 2 years ago, the weeks of bitter complaints about office politics and unqualified competitors. I thought about her response when our neighbors built a fence that blocked her view of the lake, the months of research into property laws and zoning regulations, the letters to the town council, the general campaign of harassment that ended only when the neighbors moved away. "No," I said finally. "I've never known her to lose gracefully." "Then maybe it's time to make sure you don't either." The plan was simple, which made it beautiful. I would do exactly what Vara expected me to do. Nothing. I would be the passive, defeated husband who'd been overwhelmed by his wife's superior intellect and social connections. I would let her believe she was winning while I quietly gathered the evidence I needed to protect myself. The first step was technical. Vara had always been careless with passwords, using the same combination for everything. Her maiden name plus our anniversary year. It had driven me crazy during our marriage. The way she'd leave her laptop open with her email displayed, or ask me to check her messages when she was driving. Now, that carelessness was about to become useful. I drove to the public library in Brookfield, the next town over, and used one of their computers to access Vara's email account. The login worked on the first try. What I found was better than I'd hoped for, and worse than I'd feared. The affair with Lance had been going on for 6 months, not 4. Their correspondence read like a romance novel written by people who'd learned about relationships from corporate seminars. Lance called her V and filled his messages with management speak about leveraging synergies and optimizing outcomes. Vara responded with detailed complaints about our marriage, describing me as emotionally unavailable and professionally stagnant. But the real revelation was in an email thread from 2 weeks ago, when they'd started discussing their future together. Lance had been offered a position at a larger agency in Boston. Vara was planning to follow him, using the divorce settlement to finance her transition to a more dynamic market. They'd even discussed the timeline. Vara wanted the divorce finalized before Christmas so they could start the new year unencumbered by past mistakes. I printed the most relevant emails and saved them to a flash drive, then cleared the browser history and logged out. The whole process took less than 30 minutes, but it felt like I'd just completed a graduate course in my own marriage. On the drive back to Millbrook, I called Jennifer Walsh. "I have some new information," I said. "Can we meet this afternoon?" "How new?" "New enough to change our negotiating position significantly." Jennifer's office was quieter in the afternoon, with most of the support staff gone for the day. She reviewed the printed emails with the kind of focused attention that reminded me why her hourly rate was worth every penny. "This is helpful," she said finally. "Very helpful. She's essentially admitted to planning the end of your marriage while conducting an affair. Does that matter legally? In a no-fault state? Not directly, but it matters strategically. She's been positioning herself as the injured party, the wife who tried to save a failing marriage. This shows premeditation and deception. What does that mean for the settlement? It means we don't have to be generous. She wants the house. She can buy out your equity at current market value. She wants alimony. She can explain to a judge why someone with her income and earning potential needs financial support from a husband she's been planning to leave. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For months, I'd been playing defense in my own life, reacting to Vara's moves instead of making my own. Now, for the first time, I had the initiative. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "The timeline they're discussing suggests she's been planning this for a while. That raises questions about financial disclosure. Has she opened any new accounts, made any large purchases, changed her beneficiaries on work accounts? I hadn't thought about that, but it made sense. If Vara was planning to leave, she'd want to secure her assets first." "I don't know," I said, "but I can find out." That evening, I met Mick and Roxy at the Green Lantern for what had become our unofficial strategy session. The restaurant was busy with the dinner crowd, but Roxy had saved us a table in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard. "How did the meeting with the lawyer go?" Mick asked. "Better than expected. Turns out Vara's been planning this for months, and she's been sloppy about covering her tracks." I showed them the relevant parts of the email thread, watching their expressions change from surprise to something approaching admiration. "She really thought she had you figured out," Roxy said. "The passive husband who'd just accept whatever she offered. She's not wrong about the passive part. I spent the last year of our marriage trying not to make waves. And now? Now I'm done trying not to make waves." Roxy leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I might be able to help with that. Casey's been bragging about how Vara's finally taking control of her life. She's been dropping hints about big changes coming, new opportunities, that kind of thing." "What kind of hints?" "The kind that suggest Vara's been spending money she doesn't have yet. New clothes, expensive dinners, a weekend trip to Boston last month that she claimed was for work." "How do you know it wasn't for work?" "Because I have a friend who works at the hotel where she stayed. Vara checked in with Lance, and they definitely weren't conducting business meetings." Mick shook his head. "She's getting careless." "Or confident," I said. "She thinks she's already won." "Maybe it's time to show her she's wrong." The next morning, I drove to the bank where Vara and I had maintained our joint accounts for the past 12 years. I'd already moved my salary to a new account, but there were other financial connections I needed to address. The branch manager, Patricia Vance, had handled our mortgage application and knew us both by name. She greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that suggested she'd already heard about our divorce through the local gossip network. "What can I help you with today, Corbin?" "I need to close our joint credit card accounts and remove myself as an authorized user on Vara's personal cards. I'll need written authorization from both parties for the joint accounts. I have divorce papers that give me the authority to protect my credit rating during the proceedings." Patricia reviewed Jennifer's documentation with the careful attention of someone who dealt with divorcing couples before. "This looks like everything we need. I should warn you, though. Closing these accounts might cause some inconvenience for your wife." "I understand, but I can't be responsible for debts I'm not creating." The process took an hour and involved more paperwork than seemed necessary, but by the time I left the bank, I'd severed the last of our shared financial obligations. Vara would discover the change the next time she tried to use one of the cards, probably sometime in the next day or two. My phone buzzed with a text message as I was walking to my truck. "Meeting with your wife scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. She's bringing her own attorney. Jennifer?" I smiled and typed back, "Perfect. I'll be ready." The law office felt tense with 4 people instead of 2. Vara sat across from me in her Navy power suit, flanked by her divorce attorney, Margaret Chen. She avoided my eyes. Margaret opened with a polished offer: an uncontested divorce in exchange for the house, half my retirement, and temporary alimony. In return, silence and speed. Jennifer countered calmly and slid an email thread onto the table. Emails showing Vara planning to move to Boston with her boyfriend before Christmas. The room went cold. Vara finally looked at me. Margaret skimmed the pages, her confidence slipping. "You hacked my email," Vara snapped. Jennifer shut that down fast. Shared accounts, shared computer, legal access. Margaret tried damage control. Jennifer dismantled it line by line: dates, money, intent. 6 months of an affair versus a marriage that ended last week. Vara cracked. "What do you want?" "Fair. Separate retirements, separate cars, sell the house and split what's left. No alimony. She earned more than I did." Vara exploded. "I didn't. I listed the facts. The affair, the lies, the money spent, the evidence backing every word. Jennifer gave them until Friday. After that, we'd file contested and put everything in front of a judge." Vara stood, furious. "You don't fight dirty." "I don't," I said, "but I don't let people walk over me anymore." She threatened regret. I didn't flinch. After they left, Jennifer warned me Vara would escalate: smear campaigns, delays, intimidation. But with the evidence we had, it would cost Vara more than she could afford. Driving home, my hands shook with adrenaline. The old me would have folded just to keep the peace. That version died the day Vara told me she wasn't my mother and I should stop asking for help. The new one had just begun. The retaliation began the next morning. I was replacing the alternator on Mrs. Patterson's Honda when Mick walked into the garage with an expression I hadn't seen since high school, when Tommy Brennan's older brother had threatened to beat us up for dating his ex-girlfriend. "We need to talk," he said. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and followed him to the office, where he closed the door and pulled down the blinds. "Casey Morrison was in the Green Lantern last night," he said. "She's been telling people that you had a nervous breakdown and abandoned Vara without warning. That's not exactly a surprise. There's more. According to Casey, you've been emotionally abusive for years, controlling the finances, isolating Vara from her friends, threatening her when she tried to assert her independence." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She's rewriting history. She's doing more than that. Casey also mentioned that Vara's been documenting your behavior for months, taking photos of arguments, recording conversations, building a case. A case for what? I don't know, but Roxy thinks it might be insurance in case the divorce doesn't go the way Vara wants. I thought about the email thread I'd discovered, the casual way Vara had discussed our marriage's end with her boyfriend. She'd been planning this for months, which meant she'd also been planning her defense. What kind of documentation? The kind that makes you look unstable and her look like a victim. My phone buzzed with a call from Jennifer Walsh. I answered it immediately. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Vara's attorney filed a motion for emergency spousal support, claiming you've left her destitute and unable to maintain basic living expenses." "That's ridiculous. She makes more money than I do." "I know that, and you know that, but she's claiming her income is mostly commission-based and unreliable. She's also filed a motion for exclusive use of the marital home, claiming she needs stability during the proceedings. Can she do that?" "She can try. We'll contest both motions, but it means we're going to court sooner than expected." "When?" "Monday morning, emergency hearing. You'll need to be there." After hanging up, I sat in Mick's office chair and tried to process what was happening. In less than a week, I'd gone from filing for a simple divorce to fighting a legal battle against someone who apparently viewed our 12-year marriage as nothing more than a strategic position to be defended. "You okay?" Mick asked. "I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. Vara just made a tactical mistake." "How do you figure?" "She's acting desperate. People who are confident in their position don't file emergency motions and spread rumors. They negotiate from strength. And people who are desperate make mistakes. Big ones." That afternoon, I drove to the house, our former house, to collect some tools I'd left in the basement workshop. Vara's car was in the driveway, along with Lance's BMW. Apparently, he'd moved in quickly. I used my key to enter through the front door, calling out to announce my presence. "It's Corbin. I'm here to get some things from the workshop." Vara appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing jeans and a sweater that belonged to our weekend life together, back when we'd had one. Behind her, I could see Lance hovering in the hallway like he was afraid to come downstairs. "You can't just walk in here anymore," Vara said. "Actually, I can. It's still my house, too, at least until the court says otherwise." "My attorney says you're trespassing." "Your attorney says a lot of things. Most of them aren't true." I walked past her to the basement, where my tools were exactly as I'd left them. The workshop felt smaller than I remembered, cramped and airless. It was hard to believe I'd spent so many hours down here, hiding from the deteriorating atmosphere upstairs. When I came back up with my toolbox, Lance had worked up the courage to join Vara in the living room. He was taller than I'd remembered, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested he spent more on grooming than I spent on food. "Vara tells me you've been harassing her," he said, trying to project authority. "Vara tells you a lot of things, apparently. Most of them aren't true either. I think you should leave. I think you should mind your own business. But we don't always get what we want, do we?" Lance stepped forward, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "Maybe we should discuss this man-to-man." "Sure. Man-to-man? You're sleeping with another man's wife in his house while he's paying the mortgage. How does that make you feel about yourself?" "Your marriage was already over." "According to who? You? The guy who's been screwing my wife for 6 months while she pretended to work on our relationship." Lance's face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I also know that your BMW has Massachusetts plates, which means you're probably still registered to vote here. That's going to be awkward when this whole thing becomes public record." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means small towns have long memories, and people don't like cheaters." I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to Vara. "By the way, you might want to call the credit card companies. I had to close our joint accounts to protect my credit rating. Wouldn't want you to be embarrassed at the grocery store." Vara's face went white. "You can't do that." "Already did. Amazing how much easier life gets when you stop asking for permission." I left them standing in the living room and drove back to the garage, feeling better than I had in months. The old Corbin would have slunk away from that confrontation, apologizing for existing. The new version was starting to enjoy himself. My phone rang as I was parking. Roxy's name on the display. "You need to get down here," she said. "Now." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. You're not going to believe what just walked through my door." The Green Lantern was nearly empty at 4 in the afternoon, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the television above the bar. Roxy was polishing glasses with the kind of focused energy that meant she was excited about something. "Tommy Brennan's here," she said quietly. "He wants to talk to you about the electrical work he did at Vara's agency." Tommy was sitting at a corner table, still wearing his work clothes and looking like he had something important to say. I'd known him since high school, back when he was Mick's skinny cousin who got picked on for being too smart. Now he was a union electrician with a reputation for honest work and careful attention to detail. "Heard you're having some trouble with your ex," he said as I sat down. "Word travels fast. Faster when it involves people I don't like. That Lance guy's been coming around the job sites acting like he owns the place, treating the workers like servants." "That sounds like Lance." "Yeah, well, he made a mistake last week. Started bragging to one of my guys about how he was upgrading from his previous relationship. Mentioned some things about you that weren't very nice." "What kind of things?" Tommy pulled out his phone and showed me a voice recording app. "The kind of things that might interest your lawyer. See, my guy was wearing a wire that day. Union's been having trouble with contractors who don't pay their bills, so we've been documenting everything." He played a 30-second clip of Lance's voice, slightly distorted but clearly recognizable, describing me as a pathetic loser who never deserved someone like Vara, and bragging about how he'd stolen her right out from under his nose. There's more, Tommy continued. About an hour's worth, actually. Lance really likes to talk when he thinks he's impressing people. What else did he say? Enough to prove that this affair's been going on a lot longer than 6 months, and enough to make it clear that he and Vara have been planning your divorce since before you knew there was a problem. I stared at the phone, hardly believing what I was hearing. Why are you showing me this? Because Lance Dorsey's the kind of guy who gives working men a bad name. Rich, entitled, thinks he can take whatever he wants without consequences. Tommy put the phone away. Also because you fixed my kid's laptop last year and didn't charge me enough. I appreciate this, but I can't ask you to get involved in my divorce. You're not asking, I'm offering. That recording's going to my union rep anyway as part of our documentation about working conditions. What happens after that is out of my hands. I shook hands with Tommy and bought him a beer, then called Jennifer Walsh from the parking lot. We just got some new evidence, I said. The kind that changes everything. What kind? The kind that proves Vara and Lance have been planning this divorce longer than they've been willing to admit, and the kind that makes Lance look like exactly the sort of person a small-town judge won't like. Can you be in my office in an hour? I'm already on my way. As I drove toward Jennifer's office, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Mrs. Henderson a few days earlier. She told me to make sure I was proud of how I handled things. I was starting to think I would be. The emergency hearing lasted 3 hours and ended with Vara's motions being denied and a stern warning from Judge Patricia Morrison about filing frivolous requests. Jennifer had presented our evidence methodically. The emails, the financial records, Tommy's recording, and a timeline that showed Vara had been planning the divorce while actively deceiving me about the state of our marriage. Vara sat through the entire proceeding with the kind of frozen expression that suggested she was finally understanding the difference between being smart and being wise. Lance didn't attend the hearing. According to Casey Morrison, who'd apparently switched sides when she realized which way the wind was blowing, he'd received a job offer in Seattle and was planning to relocate immediately. Some people, it seemed, preferred running away to facing consequences. The final divorce decree was signed 6 weeks later, on a gray November morning that felt fitting for ending something that had been fading for months. Vara kept her retirement savings and her car. I kept mine and half the equity from the house sale. No alimony for either party. She moved to Boston anyway, taking a position with a smaller agency that probably didn't know about her tendency to conduct personal business on company time. I heard she was dating someone new, another creative type who drove an expensive car and made promises about the future. I hoped it worked out better for both of them. The apartment above Mick's garage had become more than temporary housing. It had become home. Small, quiet, and completely mine. I'd started taking on more repair work, building a client base that appreciated honest pricing and reliable service. Mrs. Henderson had recommended me to her entire social circle, which in a town like Millbrook meant steady work for months. On the anniversary of the day Vara told me she wasn't my mother, I was sitting in the Green Lantern with Mick and Roxy, watching the Patriots lose to a team they should have beaten easily. The conversation had moved from football to local gossip to the eternal question of whether the town needed a second coffee shop. Any regrets? Roxy asked during a commercial break. I thought about it seriously. 12 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents and divided assets. A house that had held our dreams, now belonging to strangers. Friends who'd chosen sides and relationships that hadn't survived the transition. No, I said finally. I regret how long it took me to figure things out, but I don't regret how it ended. What would you do differently? I'd stop asking for help sooner. Mick laughed. That doesn't sound right. It is, though. I spent years asking Vara to be someone she wasn't. Supportive, loyal, interested in building something together instead of just taking what she could get. When she finally told me she wasn't my mother, she was actually doing me a favor. How do you figure? She was telling me the truth. She wasn't going to take care of me or support me or help me when I needed it. Once I accepted that, everything else became simple. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Hi, this is Sarah Chen, Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter. She gave me your number. My laptop crashed, and she said you're the best repair person in 3 counties. Are you available this week? I showed the message to Mick and Roxy. New client? Roxy asked. Looks like it. You going to take the job? Of course. I'm running a business here. I typed back, I can look at it tomorrow afternoon. What kind of laptop and what happened to it? The response came back immediately. MacBook Pro, coffee spill. I'm a graduate student, so all my research is on there. Kinda desperate. I can probably recover the data even if the hardware is damaged. Don't worry. Thank you so much. Mrs. Henderson said you were a lifesaver. I put the phone away and returned my attention to the football game, where where the Patriots were mounting what looked like a comeback drive. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the comfortable noise of people enjoying their evening, conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses and silverware. "You know what I like about this?" Mick said. "What?" "You're not angry anymore." He was right. The rage that had sustained me through the divorce proceedings had faded, replaced by something calmer but more durable. I'd learned the difference between being passive and being patient, between avoiding conflict and choosing my battles carefully. "I was never really angry at Vara," I said. "I was angry at myself for accepting less than I deserved. And now? Now I know what I'm worth." The Patriots scored with 30 seconds left on the clock, and the crowd in the restaurant erupted in cheers. Roxy bought a round for everyone, including the couple at the corner table who'd been arguing quietly about money for the past hour. "To small victories," she said, raising her glass. "To knowing when to stop asking for help," I replied. We drank to that, and to the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from handling your problems yourself, without apology or explanation. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows and promised the first snow of the season. Inside, surrounded by friends who'd proven their loyalty when it mattered, I felt warmer than I had in years. The debt was paid, and I was finally free.